I'm Dr. Keoki Jackson. I'm the Senior Vice President and General Manager of MITRE's National Security Sector, and it's also my pleasure to serve on the board of the AIAA, the Board of Trustees. I am excited today to continue our theme on design and development with a presentation from Jim Free. Jim is the NASA Associate Administrator, and he'll be talking on advancing microgravity science, technology, and exploration. NASA's strategy to define the next era of continuous human presence in low Earth orbit. I just want to say this is really the public rollout of this exciting new strategy. So I want to thank Jim and NASA for picking AIAA to be able to host this. As NASA's Associate Administrator, Jim is the third highest ranking executive and the highest ranking civil servant at NASA. He's the senior advisor to NASA Administrator Bill Nelson and to Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy. In this role, he leads the agency's 10 center directors as well as the Mission Directorate Associate Administrators at NASA headquarters. So we're grateful that he's here making it out at DC this morning. He also acts as the agency's Chief Operating Officer for a sense of scale. That's more than 18,000 employees and an annual budget of more than $25 billion. He's held a number of important roles at NASA, including Associate Administrator for the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, where he was responsible for the development of NASA's Moon to Mars architecture, as well as Center Director at NASA's Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, and also the Deputy Associate Administrator for Technical in the Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. He actually began his career at NASA in 1990 at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. He also spent several years in a number of private sector roles. He holds a bachelor's degree in aeronautics from Miami University of Ohio, proud Ohio native, and a master's degree in space systems engineering from the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Jim is the recipient of the Presidential Rank Award and a number of NASA distinguished medals, almost too many to list here, and many other awards as well. I also want to highlight that Jim is a new AIAA Associate Fellow. So congratulations, Jim, in achieving that. Please join me in congratulating him. So when Jim has concluded his remarks, I'm going to rejoin him up here on stage, and he's going to take questions from our audience. You know the drill. Use the QR code, and please upvote the questions that you're excited about. And with that, please join me in welcoming Associate Administrator Jim Free to the stage.
I was hoping that one would slide by, but thanks. Well, good morning, good morning. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. It's great to see some familiar faces in the audience here today, and for all the NASA folks that have taken the time to be here, I appreciate that too. I've not been to SciTech before. It's impressive scale of this conference and breadth of topics too. So on behalf of the Administrator Nelson and Deputy Administrator Melroy, I'd like to thank AIAA for hosting us here today and Keoki for the very kind introduction. I'd like to congratulate Clay Mowry on his new role at AIAA, and I look forward to doing all I can to help AIAA in the future. At NASA, we're especially grateful for the hospitality and for providing this platform to share our collective visions, plans, and activities, and we're especially grateful with the short notice to accommodate us here today to roll out this exciting new strategy. And I'm going to talk to you about that today, our LEO microgravity strategy. A key component of that strategy is consultation and getting feedback. NASA continues to model this behavior in all we do as we build our long-term strategies. And AIAA was a critical part of helping us get the feedback we needed from industry, from academia for this strategy. So when I thank you for the hospitality, it's not just for today, it's everything that you've done to get us throughout the year to strengthen our community. I'd also like to thank Catherine Hamilton and Amber Jacobson for helping put this together today. At NASA, we explore the unknown. We advance science and technology. We push boundaries. We do the hard, seemingly impossible things. We innovate for the benefit of all. We inspire. And over the past 66 years, NASA has been responsible for some of humanity's greatest achievements. Many of you in the room have been part of that. Take a moment to think about those achievements. What comes to mind for you? Is it the landing on the moon? Voyagers 1 and 2, the first two and only spacecraft to fly in interstellar space and are still collecting scientific data today. The Hubble Space Telescope and now the James Webb Space Telescope, which have both been taking awe-inspiring images and will continue to change how we look at and understand the cosmos. A series of Mars rovers that have rewritten our understanding of the red planet. The space shuttle program that led the way in teaching us how to live and work in space, including building the International Space Station. And for over 24 years, the ISS has allowed humanity to partner to continuously live and work off the planet. Now let's shift our gaze forward. What are the possibilities in our future? Humans returning to the moon, this time to the South Pole. Humans at long last walking on the surface of Mars. Potentially discovering life on another world. It's easy to think about these grand visions. They're exciting, audacious, and inspiring. They remind us why we do what we do every day. But behind every monumental achievement and every single future aspiration, there is methodical preparation, unwavering commitment, and collaboration across disciplines. Turning these dreams into reality requires more than vision. It requires a shared sense of purpose, a detailed strategy, and relentless effort within NASA and within industry and our international partners. This is the model we've adopted at NASA. Build a strategy, collect input, and then execute. A model for any organization, let alone a government agency. Let's shift our gaze now to human spaceflight. NASA human spaceflight programs have always built on each other, each step laying the groundwork for the next. The lessons of Mercury and Gemini made Apollo possible. Apollo informed the shuttle program, which in turn paved the way for the International Space Station. Today, the knowledge gained continues to shape our approach as we prepare for Artemis and missions to Mars. For over 2 decades, the ISS has been the embodiment of this progress, a beacon of what humanity can achieve when we work together. Its value goes beyond symbolism. It has been and continues to be the cornerstone of our human spaceflight program, providing valuable lessons in low Earth orbit that have laid the foundation for everything we're building toward today. The space station has established an economy in low Earth orbit, changed our procurement model, brought human launches back to U.S. soil, and enabled commercial endeavors that were not on the near-term horizon without the ISS. And as we look to the future, we face several questions. Not just what comes next, but how do we ensure that we're prepared for the next chapter of human exploration? The answer lies in a strategy we've developed to sustain a continuous human presence and continuous American presence in low Earth orbit, a strategy rooted in advancing microgravity science, technology, and exploration. We've learned so much from the ISS, and I'll talk some more about that in a minute. It has been a testbed for long-term microgravity research and technology development, hosting nearly 4,000 research and educational investigations from over 100 countries. It has taught us how to plan, sustain, and operate with humans in space, and given us incredible depth and breadth in our relationships with space agencies, research partners, and technology developers. Without space station, we wouldn't be ready to take our next steps into the solar system. But it wasn't designed to last forever. And with commercial industry proposing bold new LEO destinations for scientific research and technology development, NASA needed to take a step back and first decide what it wanted to do next in LEO before deciding how to do it. This is how the LEO microgravity strategy was born. And that brings me to the QR code I have for you on the screen today, a link to our new LEO microgravity strategy. I get to break some news with the document on the other end of that QR code. NASA released our final goals and objectives for LEO microgravity back in December. The document we're unveiling today, a brand new document that provides a complete description of our strategy and why we are pursuing it. Don't worry, I'll have the code later if you didn't get there. But I want to take you through the journey of how we developed that strategy. As we started down the road, we took a very specific look at the 3 whys you frequently hear us talk about: science, national posture, and inspiration. And as we stand on the next cusp of an era in human exploration, low Earth orbit, and microgravity will be essential to our missions as we move forward. In science, experiments in microgravity allow us to look deeper into the second and third order physical effects otherwise obscured by gravity, advancing our knowledge in ways simply unattainable under Earth's gravity. Think of the dozens of biological experiments that we've done on the ISS, from understanding how the human body reacts to being in space for long periods of time to protein crystal growth that has improved the formulation of cancer drugs. As an example, the ISS National Lab sponsored a protein crystal growth study with pharmaceutical company Merck, focused on improving how monoclonal antibody drugs are delivered to patients. The study produced high-quality crystalline suspensions that could make Keytruda, which is used to treat several types of cancers, including melanoma and lung cancer, deliverable by injection in minutes rather than hours via IV, making treatment more convenient for patients and caregivers. Follow-on research is underway with methods to target understanding how to create higher order, purer, and more uniform crystalline suspensions of Keytruda and other potential therapeutics on Earth. NASA is also awarding contracts through the agency's In-Space Production Applications, or INSPA, portfolio to support commercial development of new and promising technologies for in-space manufacturing of advanced materials and products for use on Earth, from semiconductor materials to optical fiber production. I encourage you to go read about INSPA. We're looking to continue this kind of unique, groundbreaking science that can only be done in microgravity. Next, let's talk about national posture. National posture is about our nation's global standing as a leader in space as a result of advancing technologies. There are both economic and international dimensions to national posture. In fiscal year 23, NASA generated $75 billion in economic output, 3 times our annual budget, which I'd say is a pretty good investment. Microgravity technology and operational capabilities will also be essential to future missions to the Moon and Mars. Most of a mission to Mars is going to occur in microgravity, with only a short portion in the middle on the surface of Mars that will be conducted in partial gravity. Multiple months there, multiple months back, all in microgravity. Taking the giant leap to Mars and beyond will be pushing our operational skills to the limit on such a mission. And the most accessible place to hone those skills is in low Earth orbit. The technical development we are undertaking will create new fields and disciplines that will continue to elevate our standing in the world. The international partnerships forged because of the space station have also enriched our mission. We would not be where we are today without our international partners. In short, LEO and microgravity are essential for future missions. Next, let's talk about inspiration. For inspiration, look no further than the ability of students to engage with astronauts aboard the ISS, a product of our continuous human presence in LEO spanning more than 24 years. That continuous human presence enables downlinks with astronauts nearly every day of the year, allowing all kids of all ages to witness microgravity in action and ask questions about an astronaut's life in orbit. These students also get to work on experiments that fly aboard space station, CubeSats that are deployed from ISS, and even work on crew hardware through programs like Hunch. Moments like these spark curiosity and ignite a passion for STEM. By maintaining human presence in LEO, we're inspiring kids today for STEM careers tomorrow. Next, I'd like to share a bit more about our approach and the principles that guided the development of our LEO microgravity strategy. First, we established a vision to guide our efforts: leading the next generation of human presence in low Earth orbit to advance microgravity science, technology, and exploration. Every word of that vision matters. First, we're leading. We're not waiting for the LEO commercial market to evolve. We're going to drive where it needs to be, as we have done since the beginning of COTS. The next generation of human presence in low Earth orbit defines our focus on human spaceflight in the era after the ISS, rather than all LEO activities which have different purposes. The last part is advancing microgravity science, technology, and exploration. That's crucial. We've made amazing strides in microgravity science and technology development, and a lot of those science investigations will lead to new questions. Simply put, we're far from finished in microgravity. And exploration highlights that certain microgravity skills and technologies will best be developed in LEO, like water reclamation and other environmental support technology, as well as human research that supports missions farther into the solar system. As I said, every word matters. From that vision, we developed goals and objectives. These goals and objectives ensure strategic progress towards realizing our vision. With finalized goals and objectives, we are now positioned to architect from the right. We distill the goals and objectives into the necessary systems, subsystems, and elements. By anchoring our efforts to the end state and executing from the left, which is where we are today, we can create a path to achieve those objectives. Our teams ultimately develop goals and objectives in the 7 categories that you see here. The team working on these goals and objectives reflected a whole-of-agency approach made up of representatives from space operations, exploration systems development, science, space technology, our mission support offices, and international and interagency relations, human capital, STEM engagement, and communications. The directorates and offices worked together to develop those goals and objectives, then leaned on each other for feedback. This was not our first recent experience with building an objective-led strategy. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of being part of developing an agency-wide strategy that has not only become ingrained in our agency, but is actively shaping investment in the greater aerospace community. You all know it as our Moon to Mars strategy. In that strategy, we laid out 10 goals and 63 objectives that will help us create a blueprint for responsible, sustained human presence throughout the solar system. A wireframe, if you will, to help achieve our long-term vision. A strategy deliberately developed, shared, modified, and in execution. We've taken everything we've learned from Moon to Mars strategy and applied that to experience in our strategy in low Earth orbit. Since establishing the Moon to Mars objectives, we've gone on as an agency to distill them into characteristics and needs, functions, and use cases through an annual architecture process. As a matter of fact, to date, we've held 3 annual architecture concept review and released those products for your comment and feedback. With each one of these reviews and each one of these releases, we gain more fidelity in the architecture. Creating that Moon to Mars strategy is one of the most collaborative efforts I have witnessed at the agency in my career. I'm grateful to everyone across the agency and within the community who helped us develop the strategy and continues to participate in the architecture. And it's because of everyone's dedication to that architecture and this strategy that we're rolling out today that we will find success. Let's talk about consultation. Consultation with partners was a cornerstone of the LEO microgravity strategy we are releasing today. If we wanted to be successful, we knew we needed everyone rowing in the same direction. Getting feedback on the draft goals and objectives was essential to this. And why is that? Because of our partners in industry, academia, and the international community all think of things we might not have thought of and have perspectives worth incorporating into this strategy. And each stakeholder can see what we're thinking about and ask questions that help them see their role they can play in the strategy and how they can enhance their operating models. We also welcome the critics that make our plan stronger. We expect the critics that came when we began with COTS. And when we even went back and read those criticisms to make sure that this approach was that much stronger. In August, we released the draft goals and objectives for public comment. In the month, the strategy and the objectives and goals were open for public comment. We received 800 pieces of input. The input came from inside the agency using our internal crowdsourcing platform. We had a public forum online for collecting comments. We also hosted 2 workshops in September, one in London with the UK Space Agency for international partners, and another in DC for US industry and academia. And we talked extensively through our normal coordination points with our US government partners. The comments we got, not surprisingly, were incredibly helpful. I think our team got a good crash in verb choices, as you can imagine. We definitely refined the language, and you can see in the final goals and objectives how we tightened that up. The draft included 6 categories that captured 12 goals and 42 objectives. And we ended up splitting one of the categories into 2 and adding 1 new goal and 2 new objectives, bringing our final total to 7 categories reflecting 13 goals and 44 objectives. One of the pieces of feedback that we received was that people wanted faster scientific return. So we added a new goal and objective around rapid LEO science to help us increase the pace of research. We split a category for workforce and engagement into workforce and STEM engagement and a separate category for public engagement, and also added a new objective in public engagement about collaborating our communication efforts to reach new audiences. However, as we learned through experience with the Moon to Mars strategy, in some cases feedback resulted in conflicting objectives or execution paths, so we're not able to take every piece of input. An objective-led strategic approach also means that we moved away from some people's personal widgets. While hearing those perspectives is still valuable data for consideration, eventually we need to select, explain, and move. But one of the things that everybody really wanted was clarity on continuous human presence. So let's spend a little time there. Pun intended, by the way. One of the pieces of feedback we got is that the goals and objectives did not explicitly state continuous human presence. It seemed like everyone picked up on that. It's not lost on us that it wasn't in there either. So much so that Pam may have intentionally stirred the pot at the IAC this year when she asked what continuous human presence meant to people. Continuous heartbeat or continuous capability? For those that don't know, continuous heartbeat is what we have had today for 24 years. True, unbroken, continuous presence where there is always a person living and working in space. Continuous capability is the ability to send someone to space, but not necessarily always have someone there. We've always known we wanted continuous heartbeat. It's written into U.S. policy. It affects our national posture. Truthfully, if we don't have continuous heartbeat, we risk not being the partner of choice for our international partners. We risk ceding low Earth orbit to others. And this was why consultation in this process was so important. Without your feedback, we couldn't come out and say as strongly as we wanted to that our position is continuous heartbeat. These consultations ultimately made the final product that much better. Our primary need is to mitigate risk for future trips to Mars, with long-duration flights in LEO of 6 months to a year. With the time we have left on ISS, we won't have a statistically significant population of 6 to 12-month missions to properly understand the risks of going to and returning from Mars. And from the perspective of our human research program, doing anything less than 6 months, missions of less than 6 months, has limited value. So we need long-duration spaceflight. At the same time, thanks to community input, we understand that transportation providers can maintain their business cases with flights every 6 to 12 months. It's important to maintain the transportation base because having a space station doesn't matter if we don't have a way to get the humans and the cargo they need to the stations. It's also important to have a diversity of providers to assure regular routine access and use of low Earth orbit. We've learned throughout our history that it's good to have options if a provider has an issue. I'll reiterate here, our consultations with our partners ultimately made the final product so much better, so thank you. I should also add, again, that consultation does not mean personal widget adaptation, but does mean listening and explaining. Because of your feedback, while transitioning from ISS to future commercial stations, we will maintain a consistent, unbroken presence in low Earth orbit. So what comes next? This has been a sporty process for the team, let's say it that way. They kicked it off in earnest in the spring, developed the draft goals and objectives this summer, conducted a month of comments, consultation, adjudicated this fall, and released the final objectives just before the holidays. All of this took place in about half the time it took to develop the Moon to Mars goals and objectives. This hopefully demonstrates us learning how to apply this model across NASA and do it quicker and even better. I want to thank that team for learning from our previous efforts and working so effectively. Specifically, I'd like to thank Robin Gatens, Maddie Sengupta, and John Keefe, who led that effort for it. That said, our team understands that developing goals and objectives was just the beginning. We established those goals and objectives to focus on the what first, and next we'll get to the how. We have a draft RFP for phase 2 of commercial LEO destinations on the horizon. We need to break the goals and objectives down further to inform program plans and requirements, including the draft RFP itself. We also know that this will not be a one-and-done effort. Ongoing consultation is important to ensure our plans stay aligned with our stakeholders, both inside and outside the agency. We'll have a regular cadence of internal agency reviews to establish the characteristics and use cases of all the systems needed to maintain a future continuous human presence and to track our progress towards achieving those goals and objectives. We recognize that new technologies and capabilities will come online, and we may evolve our strategy with adjustment based on the advancements that we see in LEO. We'll also continue to have stakeholder workshops to discuss and solicit feedback on our plans. So grand visions are built on those countless small and deliberate steps. It's easy to be captivated by the goals we set along the way, walking on Mars, uncovering the secrets of the cosmos, and achieving breakthroughs that redefine our understanding of life and the universe. But we shouldn't forget that these monumental achievements depend on the groundwork and the strategies we lay down today. Low Earth orbit is not just a waypoint. It's a place for amazing scientific discovery. It's also a proving ground, a place where we will learn, innovate, and strengthen the foundation that will carry us to the future. And the LEO microgravity strategy we've developed is both a shared vision and a roadmap. It's about ensuring that we reduce the risks and pave the way for going to the moon, Mars, and beyond, while seizing the unique opportunities close to home. As we execute this strategy, and frankly all of our strategies, there will be challenges along the way, big challenges. But one thing is for sure about this community: we do, as President Kennedy said, the hard things. We do them because they push us to be better, to be bold, to innovate, and to lead. And finally, we remember, and I want you all to remember, that NASA cannot achieve this alone. You, the members of this incredible community, are the teammates who will help us make this all a reality. You might be shaping policy, you might be building a component of the architecture, you might be conducting research, or you might be inspiring the next generation. But let me tell you this, that your contributions matter. Together, we are weaving the fabric of humanity's future in space, one thread, one breakthrough, one mission at a time. So let's keep that momentum going. Let's push forward with the same drive that got us to the moon, the same ingenuity that has kept humans living and working in space for over 2 decades, and the same audacity that dreams of humans walking on Mars. Thank you for being part of this journey, and in the spirit of consultation, let's move to some questions. Thank you.
Take them from here or up on stage? You want to join me on stage?
Sure.
Thank you, Jim, for an inspiring presentation, for sharing that vision and that strategy. I also want to say congratulations to you and the whole NASA team for this rollout, and especially for the process, the consultation, the collaboration that you use throughout that entire development. So there's a lot of interest in what you talked about. We've got just shy of half an hour for questions here. And I may start with one of the most upvoted questions. So people are pretty interested not just in being in space, but building and doing in space. And so this one, what do you see as the role of in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, or ISAM, for human presence in lower Earth orbit? And how is NASA assisting that both for academia and industry?
I think the greatest example of in-space assembly in low Earth orbit is the ISS. It probably doesn't get much better than that, especially when you look at the course that the ISS went through. We have a significant ISAM effort. I think I saw Bo Naz here when I was walking the hallways. Bo is our lead in that area. We see that there is potential in low Earth orbit. Commercially, it was centered in low Earth orbit before. It moved on to GEO from there. I think many of you know what we went through with our OSAM mission this past year. But we develop technologies. We use those technologies. If I look at what we're going to use in lunar orbit for the gateway, those technologies are necessary. The rendezvous and proxops are there. So from our perspective, our ISAM, we certainly have technologies that can be applied in low Earth orbit. We're using them around lunar, but we'll continue to support that as the community evolves.
Well, maybe I'll keep pulling the thread on that discussion, and particularly on the commercial piece of this. You talked about some exciting proposals out there for essentially commercial presence in low Earth orbit. Can you talk a little bit more about how NASA will be working with the commercial sector there?
Yeah, so I will be a homer for a second. I think we've spurred those on with our Space Act agreements that we've had with a number of companies now in our phase 1. I talked about our phase 2 RFP that's coming up. We had a RFP years ago to make available one of the ports on the ISS to actually use ISS services, use the ISS know-how. Our draft RFP will come out. We need those platforms in low Earth orbit. We don't want to be the only user of them. That's why we're trying to spur them on, much like the commercial crew and cargo has taken advantage of from previous instantiations. So I look at us continuing to lead by trying to create that demand and hoping that other demand comes along with it.
Yeah, and you point out that it is NASA's demand, but that there is a potentially broader economic play here. Can you talk a little bit, and one of the questions specifically says, where do you see the biggest potential economic value coming out of our low Earth orbit program?
Well, I talked about INSPA there in my discussion. That's a very unique program that actually I've just learned a lot about here recently, where that manufacturing in space is becoming a value. The optical fiber purity, I'm not going to get the right technical parameter there, but the optical fiber purity is my simple propulsion engineer word of manufacturing in space, and the structures help the efficiency of optical fibers that much better, as an example. So manufacturing is one way. When you look at the business cases for the folks that have talked about their commercial LEO destinations, they've talked about manufacturing, they've talked about research, they've talked about space tourism. For us, it comes back to we need the platform to do our science, to do our research on humans, which we know low Earth orbit's a great place to do it, and microgravity has some very unique and sometimes very individual effects on people. So if we're driving that and people have the platform to provide power, data, gases, other supplies, they can use it in those areas like manufacturing or their own science.
Well, maybe I'll continue on that theme. You talked about the research on humans. And I got to put in a plug for NASA here as well, because NASA actually funded my graduate research as a graduate research fellow in human adaptation to the space environment. So well done, NASA. But where I wanted to go with that, you touched on some of the areas that will essentially frame the questions for the next generation here. Can you talk about some of those unanswered questions for long-term human presence in orbit?
I mean, some of the answers are, some of the problems we have, space adaptation syndrome, how fluid shifts affects people's visions. We're finding that extensively from long duration, and even some cases shorter duration crew members. We need to figure that out because folks' vision changing on the way to Mars, we need a countermeasure for that. So that's one that I'd point out. Blood clots are an interesting thing of how they occur and how to deal with them in orbit. We don't talk a lot in detail because it's private medical information, but those problems are things we're going to have to solve 6 months there, 6 months back. We have to figure those countermeasures out. Radiation is another one. Galactic cosmic radiation, when we get outside the Van Allen belts, is a real issue for humans. We have to figure out those countermeasures. That's some of the stuff we're trying to do on space station today, and that we will look to continue in low Earth orbit.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind, and this being our audience here, we got some sort of practical questions. So thinking about both that long-term presence of humans, but the increasing amount of both commercial and international presence in space in low Earth orbit in particular. What's NASA doing to deal with the potential problems of orbital debris in LEO?
Well, I think you saw our Deputy Administrator, Pam Melroy, roll out our first phase of our space sustainability strategy earlier this year, which is trying to understand, which the first phase is in low Earth orbit, trying to make sure that we're cognizant of taking care of that environment. We try and work with our other governmental partners on orbital debris issues. Certainly just tracking orbital debris, trying to mitigate any conjunctions that we have through maneuvering or other people maneuvering their things out of the way. So right now it's kind of, I'd say, at its nascent stage, but obviously with the problems that we're all seeing, that's got to grow. And our space sustainability effort in low Earth orbit, next is cislunar, is hopefully trying to address that.
Well, you've got a mix of folks here from across private industry. I see a number of NASA folks out here as well, DOD and international. Is there a little bit of a call to action that you would say as you look at the orbital debris problem?
Yeah, I think our Deputy Administrator gave that call to action in her space sustainability speech. I'm not going to give it better than her. I would encourage you to look at our strategy and see how, just like this, how you can contribute and how you can be part of our mitigation efforts, and frankly, whole of government, which we have obviously strong ties with the Space Force in that too.
All right. Well, I'm going to pivot a little bit here. There's a number of questions about the tie of this strategy, the LEO strategy and microgravity strategy, to Moon to Mars, which you had a huge part in rolling out as well. Can you talk about the interrelationships, particularly for long-term presence in LEO?
The example I'll give is the connection to the 6 to 12 month missions that I talked about in this strategy. We need those missions to understand what it's going to take to send our crews onto Mars. We need those data that we're going to get in those 6 to 12 months missions in LEO to help us prepare our crews to go to Mars. And then when we look at countermeasures and we send people to the Gateway for shorter duration missions, how can we play those countermeasures out to see if they're effective still in microgravity, but on our lunar missions to the crews we leave behind? So that's one example. If you look at our scientific goals, there is some overlap in the science, but there's a coordinated approach to the science with our Science Mission Directorate that we have in our Moon to Mars, very similar, where we're coordinated across the entire agency, which again is probably one of the greatest, I'll say, tangible efforts that we have the entire agency working together. As I mentioned, that I've never seen that in my whole career.
Well, there's obviously some critical interrelationships here. As I said, we got some practically minded folks out here, so now I'm starting to see questions coming in about trade-offs and budgets.
Okay.
And in particular, as you think about Artemis and the Gateway coming on and then the decommissioning of the ISS, how are you managing sort of the long-term budgetary implications for this strategy with the NASA budget?
Well, our first priority is to fly ISS safely. That's our first priority from a budget perspective. Then we have to budget properly to bring these new commercial LEO destinations on, to keep that continuous heartbeat in low Earth orbit. We also have to find a way to deorbit the space station safely. So we have to look at those priorities, and I think most folks know, I shouldn't say most folks because I probably wasn't aware until 10 or 15 years ago, that we're funded by Mission Directorate. So Space Operation Mission Directorate and Captain Ken Bowersox, he takes care of making sure we budget those priorities. And then Kathy Kerner in Exploration System Development lays out those Artemis plans from a budget, for a budget perspective. And then at the agency level, we have to make the trades if there's a trade between the two. And I have seen this administrator and this deputy administrator go to the mat with the Office of Management and Budget to say, if we're going to keep exploring and we're going to do it safely, we need to prioritize all of those. So that's what we're trying to do right now, and we'll take that case to the next administration as well.
All right. One of the questions that came up is the balance or the mix between sort of the home, if you will, and what's developed by NASA, and what might be provided or leased from commercial industry. How do you think about that balance, and what are some of the big opportunities there on the commercial side?
Yeah, I think our goal right now is, I mentioned the key of transportation. We have to keep a transportation base out there. We need that access to low Earth orbit. So there may be some early phases where we look at transportation differently than stays on an orbit. That's something we're talking about right now. We want to lease time and space on these commercial LEO destinations. We want to put our crews there and execute our hardware, our experiments. If there's things our crew can do to help commercial while they're there, that's certainly an opportunity. I think our biggest worry point, if I could say that, is environmental control and life support systems. We are seeing that challenge across our programs today on ISS, on Orion and exploration, the challenges of building high-performing, long-lasting, low-maintenance environmental control and life support systems. So we're trying to decide, is that something NASA can partner more with industry on to share our knowledge, to bring on maybe some suppliers that haven't traditionally been there.
Fantastic. Well, maybe I'll go beyond sort of the commercial relationships and talk a little bit about the international scene. And you talked about national posture in your presentation. First of all, the ISS obviously has been a great success in terms of really a global partnership there. Yes. Can you talk about what you see in terms of this strategy going forward? And then I think there's a couple follow-on questions coming out of that as well.
Okay. International partnership is essential. It's what we do. Number one, the international partners look to NASA to lead. When I think of our European partners, our Japanese partners, our Canadian partners, they look to NASA to lead, but to be active participants. We have brought them along with us on this strategy. Initially, we were more like, hey, you need to figure out your way. We're going to go buy things by the yard. You buy things by the yard. Now we're looking at, are there other ways to cooperate? We want to keep the cooperation in science, sharing our science data. We want to figure out how we can fly differently with our international crew members, where maybe they are leading a mission and we're supporting them, or inverse. But what we need to do is keep that international partnership going forward. But for them, and Pam found this out at the IAC, science is the core for them. The national posture is important, but doing the science and the return on the science, when you look at how other nations budget their space budgets, they have a fixed science budget that is funded right out of the gate. There is no doubt you will do fundamental science. So that's their key to international partnerships and flying in space. We need to continue to help them to leverage that.
Okay. I know that you did extensive coordination. I had the opportunity last year to come in at the tail end of one of the international sessions on the development of this strategy here. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the feedback that you got, not just on the science, but maybe the development and the exploration elements? And what were some of the biggest opportunities that our international partners highlighted?
I think it's what are their, once we get past the science, to your point, what are their long-term goals? Much like in the Moon to Mars architecture, we set out what are your country's long-term goals for LEO. In some cases, it might be developing a particular technology that they want to use on their future missions. The Europeans have talked about their goal to deliver cargo to low Earth orbit, right? They've put a program in place to do that. So how can our partnership in commercial LEO destinations help them further their national goals?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna do another pivot here. This being SciTech, I'm gonna hit you with a modestly technical question. And maybe by way of context, earlier this morning we heard from Kristen Baldwin, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Science and Technology, and she presented the Air Force's digital engineering and mission engineering strategy. And so can you tell us about your view on NASA's sort of digital strategy for low Earth orbit, things like digital twins, bringing in AI technologies and capabilities like digital and mission engineering?
Yeah, I think we have a digital engineering approach in the agency right now that we are trying to modify our tools, get them across multiple mission directorates. Our mission directorates can be stovepipe sometimes, but our technical people work across them. So how do we influence the earlier missions, maybe some of the Class C, Class D missions with our engineering tools before we put them on the Class A mission, so we get an understanding of how to work for them. On artificial intelligence, it's interesting, Dave Salvanini is our Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer for the agency. He and I have had some very heated discussions because initially we talked about AI and we didn't talk about mission. We shouldn't just do AI to do AI. We should do AI to further our missions, to enhance our scientific return, to prepare us to go further into the solar system sooner. He has made it very clear to me, we have over 400 applications of AI today in the agency that are mission focused. Now, they aren't broad, massive efforts, but we're slowly trying to grow and bring AI in, kind of, I assume, as everybody does, in a responsible way so that we understand how it affects our missions and how we can get the greatest payback. So I'd say we're at the forefront of that. I think Dave started in June of last year as our Chief AI Officer, and Pam has been leading that for us very well with the Artificial Intelligence Board. We all take some, I guess, solace at NASA when we call something a board, but we have a board, we have a structured approach to it, and I think I was shocked that we had 400 different applications of it already.
Well, just as a side, I'm going to say, you got a pretty cool job at being the Chief AI Officer at NASA. Sounds
not bad.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with what I got now because I would not be a good Chief AI Officer.
Maybe to just go a little bit deeper on that, you talk about 400 different applications, mission focused. What are some of the things that, the office sees as probably the biggest needle movers with the application of AI, particularly for an audience that's starting to pick these tools up and apply them in not just their engineering, but the way they do their work every day?
I think one of the places that I'm most excited to see AI applied, and there's there's more than a couple applications of it, but is in our, I don't even know how many petabytes of scientific data that we have accumulated over the years just about Earth. How can we take AI and put all of that data together and look at our own Earth differently than we have before? That to me is the most exciting. The planet we explore the most is our own, and we all have a vested interest in understanding what's happening on Earth. And I think that's, to me, the most exciting application.
Well, I'm going to come back to Moon to Mars because there's questions about rumors and, are we going to consider skipping the Moon altogether and going straight to Mars? And I was hoping, maybe refresh us on the rationale on the Moon to Mars strategy and what were some of the key drivers that led us to that and how the microgravity strategy supports that.
Sure. So, key for the Moon is understanding how our systems operate in a partial gravity environment. Understanding a part of the Moon that we've never gone to, where the history of the solar system is documented in a much greater age. So 3 billion years around the equator, 4 to 4.5 at the poles. Resources on the Moon, and doing that exploration partial gravity close to home. So for me, the Moon is an essential step. I can't speak to what the future holds or what comments have been made lately. I can tell you that our focus is going to the Moon, and we have thousands of people across the world working every day to put us back on the Moon, including not just NASA people, folks in our contractors, folks in the research community, and our international partners as well.
Well, I think, continue to articulate that rationale for going back to the Moon is very important, and a number of questions that touched on that, so thank you for addressing that.
Sure.
Since we are here at AIAA, there are a few questions specific to AIAA, and again, congratulations on being elected to Associate Fellow. So the first one, AIAA has a technical committee on microgravity and space processes. Would you mind giving some advice about how we at AIAA could align with the vision and the strategies you mentioned, and also enhance some of the AIAA-related activities and content that ties into your strategy?
Yeah, align and enhance, the two words that I took away from. Let's start with enhance. AIAA, as I mentioned, has already been a great asset to us in helping us execute our workshops. That's the greatest way to get feedback. And when you look at the strategy, and we'll look for feedback again, as I talked about, when you look at the strategy, where can you pull on specific tracks that might add some of that depth when you look at a goal or an objective, or when you think about the future of commercial LEO destinations, how can that technical community draw out the papers to bring out issues? There's going to be challenges. I talked about that with this implementation. I love to see that technical community draw out what those challenges are. As far as alignment, this is our strategy. So it's not my place to say what technical committee should align with what. You're a technical committee, and having served on one much earlier in my career.
Which technical committee was it?
It was a propulsion committee.
All right.
I mean, it's the only real, that's the propulsion
this
conference.
Glenn right here,
The guy's a simple propulsion engineer. That's why I struggle with it.
Sorry to distract
No, it's good.
you.
But alignment, that's the alignment. What I want to say is, if there's controversy, draw it out in your technical committee and feed it back into the strategy so we can update it. That's the beauty of those technical committees, is they're free-flowing discussions that everyone should benefit from. So alignment seems very much like, hey, you have to align, so I don't want to use that word. It'd be great to see some alignment, but as a part of always growing, we should always push those boundaries. So I encourage that technical committee to give feedback in the next round, talk with Robin Gatens about what you think should be done differently. Oh, and one thing, read the draft RFP when it comes out, please. We always look for feedback. That's why we put draft RFPs out there. We need the feedback for these commercial LEO destinations to be better.
All right, this one's not a question, but I'll just put it out there for your consideration. This is a plug for the AIAA Microgravity and Space Processes Technical Committee with 2 public sessions on Thursday. Just popped away. So they're inviting you to come and drop by and give your thoughts on that. We'll pass that off to your front office.
I would love to stay for the rest of this conference. Unfortunately, I'm on a 12:30 flight today.
I think this is later later in the spring. But
okay, all right.
Anyway, so again, thank you for those comments, and thanks for the the challenge out there to our entire AIAA organization. So that's pretty exciting. I think we've got time for maybe just a couple of more questions here. This is a little bit about what the future of these space habitats might hold as we think about the strategy. And do you see any potential for different kinds of form factors from what we've seen recently to more things like centripetal gravity? And if so, how soon will we have that?
Yeah, that is a architecture piece way ahead of me. There's some folks from our Space Technology Mission Directorate, Michelle Monk, sitting out here. I suggest that Michelle, I won't make Michelle raise her hand, but she's in the second row. She raised her hand, see? Our Space Technology Mission Directorate would be the ones to talk that. A form factor driven by how you launch it. Your first question to me was about ISAM. Do you look at assembly of structures like that differently in low Earth orbit? So for me, that's far outside of my thinking, but I know that is something we're going to need if we want to overcome those microgravity things that bug us every day, that make the crews work out 2.5 hours every day to counter the effects of microgravity. There may be things like that will help us overcome it.
All right. So I'm gonna touch on one thing, and this goes back to the international and the global elements and the national posture. But we are increasingly in an era of global strategic competition that in some ways is reminiscent of the Cold War of my childhood days, our childhood. And I'm curious, as you think about increasingly like a long-term Chinese presence in low Earth orbit, can you articulate the importance of U.S. leadership in microgravity and that continuous presence in space?
I probably need to filter a little bit for myself here. Look, I talked about national posture. It is incredibly important for us to lead. If you try and think about a world where we do not lead in space, I have not experienced that in my lifetime, and I don't want to. I think it's important because we also build partnerships, I think, in a positive, forward-going way. If I look at what we've done on ISS, we've opened that to many participants in terms of the scientific experiments, to the folks that have visited ISS, to the partnerships we've built across with many countries that in many times, including now, seem unimaginable. So for me, it has been a beacon of peace and soft power also in the world. We've built Artemis through the Artemis Accords to really just openly say, this is how we're going to operate when we explore the moon, how we're going to care for the resources, how we're going to talk about what we're doing on the moon. We've opened that to any participant in the Artemis Accords that would like to sign on to those values. They seem pretty fundamental values to me, and we've had over 50 countries now sign on. I'm not going to get the number right, 51, 52. I'm looking at Catherine there. I think it's 51. But we're building in a way that is sustainable and open and safe. That's the way we've operated on ISS. And I think that is leadership in itself. A lot of it is what you can launch, the complexity of it, but a lot of it's in how you lead. And I think those two together is what we've done and we need to continue to do.
All right. Well, we've come close to the end here. I'm going to finish up with a question from our students and our young professionals. Other than your time on the Technical Committee on Propulsion, what was the most exciting thing about your distinguished career at NASA, and what advice would you have for folks who would like to share in those kinds of experiences in their career going forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have the fortune of having my two youngest kids are aerospace engineering students now, so we have some of these discussions. They unfortunately have been, burdened with hearing my NASA stories their entire lives. But for me, it was, I do love my job now. For me, it was when I first came out of school and got to work on hardware and actually build things, blow things up intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, on the ground, for the record. And and to learn. I learned so much in the early part of my career from working on hardware that I can't stress enough the importance of doing that. And because it brings you so much joy, and I feel like I can engage in things now in my career because of the experience I had early on where I was actually building and operating things in space. So to me, that's the advice I would give, and it's really, really cool. From a NASA perspective, working for NASA has been great. There's a lot of opportunities at NASA and in industry as well. And if I could, in our last 27 seconds, what I've told our NASA team in what we're going through now in a transition, our job is to keep flying our missions, keep developing our missions, and keep taking care of people, and explain what we've been doing to the new team coming in. That's our job, and I think we're doing that. If we lose focus on any of that by worrying about changes, something bad's going to happen, and we need to stay focused on those four things.
Well, Jim, thank you for a really inspiring discussion. Thank you for telling us about that vision for that tapestry, if you will, of the next generation of humanity in orbit. And I'll just say thank you for your continued leadership at a critical time and for taking on the acting administrator role with the transition of the new administration. We know we're in good hands.
Thank you very much, Q. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
I do want to offer you,
yes.
This is the coveted AAA coin. So
yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Of the Institute, thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks so much.
Safe travels getting out of here.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.